Welcome guys to this second video in our series of work on web design. So for this project 2, what we're going to be doing is adding some styling to this web page that we created in project 1. Now what I've done here is I've changed the title to project 2, basic styling of a web page. I need you to do the same thing, so you need to open up the file that you created from project 1, make this change here. And the other thing that we're going to need to do is to make sure that you've got a folder for project 2. So if you haven't, just go back to here. Need to go to we can browse your files. Let me just make that size so we can see it. Okay, so documents, and then go to where you've got your work saved, level 2 web design, project 2. Make a folder for that, and then copy and paste into that, copy and paste into project 2 the file you've got in project 1 if you haven't opened it yet. If you have opened it, simply save your file that you've got open, still as index but in the project 2 folder. Okay, so guys, let's have a look then at what we can do to style this up. You might recall that the way that this looks at the moment, let me just make this a size we can see it, just a moment. Okay, so it's looking like this at the moment. Okay, this is the basic default styling that is coming from the browser basically. So what the headings look like and the bullet points and everything else is dependent on the browser at the moment. Right, so let's leave that one open. We can come back to it later and compare it. Just minimize it for now. Okay, so how do we add some styling in? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to add styling to the head section of the document. That's one place where styling information can go. Another very common thing that you would do, and we will do this with some projects later, is to put the styling information into a separate file, and we would link it from here, the head section, to that file. We'll come across that later. Okay, so for now, let's add some styling in. The way that you do that is with some style tags. So we have our opening and closing tags as before, and then inside this we're going to create our first bit of styling information. Now I'm going to simply start to do this, and I'll explain it basically as we go. Okay, so what I've done here is I've selected one element from this page here, and it happens to be the body, meaning that essentially, if you remember, that all of the web page fits inside the body tags here. So what this means when I create a rule for the body is that this rule would apply to everything that's inside it. Take another example. If I were to make a rule for P, paragraphs, it would apply to all paragraphs. Okay, and if I made one for this ordered list, it would apply to this ordered list and any others that we might have in our document. Okay, and what happens if I make a rule for the body and then I have a different rule, say, for paragraphs, and they sort of conflict? Maybe set a font here and set a different font here. The one which applies is the more specific one. So we'll have a look at that with an example a little bit later. But the more specific a rule is, okay, the more weight it carries. Okay, so let's carry on and now have a go at trying to make something happen. So I've started to write back, and the Notepad++ has given me a few prompts here, and I'm going to choose background color, which is pretty obviously what it's going to do. It's going to change the background color. Notice the spelling here. This is correct. This is American spelling of color, and I'm going to set it to this particular color, and this is simply a code for a sort of green color. Okay, let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. And what I think we'll do is we'll put a few annotations here. Let's go with something that we can see. Okay, a bit of a green color. So what we've done here is we've got this thing that we've selected. So the body, this is called the selector. This is the thing I'm selecting on the page. Now notice we have these opening and closing curly braces. They are a must, you've got to have those. Okay, then after that we had background color. Now background color, this is the property that I want to change. So this is known as the property when we talk about how CSS rules work. You have a selector, the thing we're selecting, and this is the property that I'd like to do something to for the body. And then we have a value. In this case it's a hexadecimal code for a color. And then we have this semicolon at the end of the line. This is a must as well, so you've got to have that semicolon. Okay, and this is known as the value then. So we have a selector, a property, and a value. Okay, the curly braces, the property followed by a colon, 2 dots, the value followed by a semicolon. And we can have more properties and values inside here, and we'll see that in a moment. Okay, let's just clear that off for now, and let's go back and actually have a look and see what this looks like inside the browser now. So just minimize that. Oops, better get the old pointer back. Okay, let's run that in Chrome. Right, so this is what it was originally. Let's refresh that. No. Okay, looks like I've saved that file, and so it's overriding that. So this is what it's looking like now. Okay, and the font, the fonts basically stay the same. Let me just double check on that one moment. Okay. Okay guys, just back here after I just checked a few things. Yeah, this is what I was expecting to see. Okay, we've got our project 2, but now we've got this green color in the background here, because that's the only thing we've changed. The font basically is as we had it before in that first exercise, project 1. Okay, so heading back to Notepad++, let's put another property in here now. So one of the other things that we commonly would do for our web pages is to set a font. You might recall from last year's work, we use what's called a font family to do that. A font is simply a style of writing, and when you specify a font family, commonly you put the font names in quotation marks here. So this is a kind of font, and this needs to be on the computer in which you're opening the web page in for that to work. And if that particular font was not available, let's specify another. And if that one was not available, Okay, we're going to go with this one here. You may be wondering where I'm getting these names from. These are basically fonts that were available when I was doing this exercise with Dreamweaver. Okay, then we've got another font here. This one here, it doesn't have any quotation marks, but it still would work, Verdana, because this is pretty much a standard system font for most computers. Okay, so the way in which this would work again, if this font's available, it is used because it's first. If this one's not available, we'll use this one. If that's not available, this one, and so on down to the last one, the sans serif. Okay, this is a font which is available on all operating systems. It's the standard default sans serif font, whatever that happens to be for that operating system. Okay, so let's save that. Now it's been done. Let's run that in Chrome. Okay, now this was the one that we just had before, and this is the change now. So as you can see, the font, okay, looks different, and that's what we've changed as well for everything inside the body. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, let's have a look at trying to change the heading 1. Okay, this heading that we've got here, this project 2, I want to change that. So we're going to set a different font family for that one. Now, just to save you watching me type very slowly, I'm going to copy and paste this over. Okay, so it's a different font family, so it's using these fonts here. Okay, once again it would choose the first one here if it's available, and so on down the line until, if none of those previous ones were available, these ones here, if none of them were on the computer, then we use the default serif font that comes from the operating system. Right, so let's save that and have a look at that. And what we should see is that the heading 1 has got a different font from the rest of the page. So let's run that. Okay, so here's our heading 1. Okay, and notice heading 2 is in a different font. So this is picking up the font that we specified in that rule. Okay, let's do another rule. Commonly paragraphs, we want to do things like set something like maybe a different color. This will be the font color that we're setting now. So I'm going to, instead of having black, I'm going to specify a dark gray color. And let's also increase the line height slightly. Now I'm going to use a percentage here, and that's spelled incorrectly, so height there. Okay, so this should be slightly more spaced out than the default one, the one we had at the start. So let's have a look. Okay, so this is what we started off with. That was one change we made to heading 1. Okay, and this one here, in fact, specifying 120% for the line height actually made it slightly more compressed. So if we're not happy with that, let's go and increase that up to, say, something like 135. Save it, launch it. Okay, and that's pretty much like what the default was. Maybe that default actually has slightly too much space between the lines. So in fact, what I will do, let's go back to here and let's put that something like 125. Okay, that's looking reasonable. Slightly closer together than what we had on the original one. Okay, let's have a look then. One more thing that we'll do, and let's start to put a few more rules in here, and let's specify we're going to target the block quote. Okay, so what are we going to change for the block quote? Well, let's specify a different font family again. Let's say we want a special font for that particular, things like a block quote, and let's use those fonts there, and let's put a border around this block quote. So we're going to specify a border. Okay, now what I'm writing here is a rule that has a number of different aspects to it, and what this is basically saying is I want a border which is 2 pixels thick, solid, so in other words it's a solid line instead of dashed or something, and we're specifying a color here which I think is a kind of green. And let's have a look at putting in a property called border radius, and let's specify that as 11 pixels. What this will do is it's going to put a box basically around the block quote, but it will have a rounded corners effect to it. And let's change the background color for this element different from the rest of the page. Semicolon there. Okay, now this isn't going to look exactly the way I want it. There's one more thing I want to do, but let's just have a look at that for now. So as you can see here, it's put a border around that. It's got a certain color, and notice it's got rounded edges. Okay, and yeah, the only thing which is, I suppose, not the way I want it is that this text is jammed right up against the border. So let's just take a moment to talk about how you can add some spacing in, and I'll just keep this open here while I just talk about it. Okay, let's get a color we can see. Let's go with blue, and let's go with a medium size. Hopefully that's not too thick. Ooh, yes it is. Too thick. Let's go with thin then. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to try and fit some spacing in between the text and the border. Okay, now you might recall from last year's work, or if this is all new to you, the way in which it's going to work is like this. Let's imagine that this is the text. Okay, this is the element, and it's taking up a certain width and height. Now what I want to do is, here's our border, and let's actually make it sort of look rounded. This is what I'd like to end up with. Okay, so we want to have a bit of space between the actual element taking up a certain width and a certain height, and then the border. Okay, the way that we do that is we need to give this here, the space in here, a name, and what it's known as is as padding. Okay, it's the name given to that. And there's also one other thing that we can have. Let's make that in a different color. We can also have specified outside that more space. So this will be space outside of the border, and this is known as the margin. So we've got our text element, or whatever element. It might not be text, it could be an image, but we've got an element, and then we might have a border. Okay, and sometimes the border will be invisible, we actually won't be able to see it, but there's that border in this particular case, in this example, and then we've got this room in here, and we're going to specify how much of that we want. So this is the padding we're going to set, and if we wanted to, we could have some room outside of the border, and this is known as the margin. Now all of that together, okay, is given a name, and then this thing is known as the box model, and this is true for any element that you put onto a web page. Okay, it has a certain width and height, you can have some padding around it, you can have a border, and you can have margin. Okay, so let's go and try and set that. Right, so let's jump back to Notepad++. Here we go, and let's specify some padding. Now I'm going to specify some padding that's going to affect all four sides, the top, the right, the middle, and the bottom. So I'm just going to set that as padding 8 pixels. You can actually set the padding for all four sides around an element separately, but for us, okay, this should be fine. We're just going to set it once. Let me refresh this. Okay, having saved it and refresh it, it should update. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so we can see here we've now got some room in between the element and the border. And the fact that this looks like more space is simply more to do with the text wrapping than it is anything else. Okay, so we have the end product that we're after. Okay, so I need you to create this, save it, and once again, if you could put this file into your OneNote, okay, where you've got project 2. So if I'm going to have a look at a particular student's work, okay, let's take Aaron here. Let's make that a little smaller so we can see it. Okay, if I go to his web design, so he's got project 1 where he needs to put that file, then you add a page, and we're going to call this project 2, and then he needs to save that in here. Okay, so that's it for now, guys. We'll catch you with project 3, okay, in the next day or so.